we would need to have a minimum of 4 families to do so. So ourselves being one family and working for 3 more to get things going here in East Sussex. Okay, so without further ado, let's make a start. So the Virtue Academy. So the primary ends of marriage, as the Catholic Church teaches, are procreation and the education of children. And often Catholics know about the procreation side of things, but often the education side gets neglected, and they are both the primary ends of marriage. There's very little point in just having lots of children if they're not going to be going on a journey towards heaven. So we want to be just as important to spend time educating and providing a quality Catholic education for our children, just as important as their procreation. So then the purpose of the Virtue Academy is to assist parents to educate their children to become the new mature persons that God calls them to be. Now, you can imagine that quite a lot of establishments will say pretty much the same thing. So therefore, we need to look at what is it that we are proposing to get us there. But before we do that, we'll just talk very quickly about myself, Peter, and Annalisa, because obviously if you're thinking of sending your children to us from September for a couple of days a week, you would like to know who we are and a bit about our background, particularly as we're just starting. People might not know who we are, and obviously there's not much of a brand name or an awareness behind who we are or the school yet because we haven't started. So let's just have a quick look at that. So I have a bachelor's degree in physics from Durham University. I have a theological master's degree and MA in marriage and family from Maryvale. I'm a qualified secondary school teacher. I taught science at school, biology, physics, chemistry, and I taught physics at A-level. I taught in school for 5 years, and after that I trained to become a chartered accountant, and after that I also became a chartered tax advisor working in the field of accountancy. I then took the plunge, as they say, moving into entrepreneurialism by opening my own accountancy firm in 2012, and I ran my own accountancy firm for 8 years with 3 members of staff, and we had an office just off Guildford High Street. Very successful business, went very well. I guess got a bit of itchy feet and decided to start a second business, which was an IT software business related to accountancy about tax. And that kicked off and went live in January 2019. And then by the middle of August the following year in 2020, I was struggling to run 2 businesses at the same time. So I sold the accountancy firm and just worked on the IT software business. And I tend to work about 3 days a week doing that. And used to running a business, used to employees and so on. And I guess because of my administrative qualities, I was asked to become a charitable trustee for a national Catholic charity, has a turnover of about £500,000 every year. And I was then elected to become the chair of the charitable trust running the trust. So used to running organizations. So hopefully you'll see that you're in good hands. Also, you'll see that as an entrepreneur, I'm used to starting things and being successful at things, organizations. And I've been home educating our children for 12 years. I've been doing 1 day a week, and my wife, Annalisa, has been doing 4 days a week. So our eldest child is now 17. She would be effectively in year 12 if she was in school. And all our children have been home educated from sort of effectively from reception year. So none of them have actually been to school. They've all been to nursery, but none of them went to school. So Annalisa, she has a BA in Modern Foreign Languages from Bergamo in Italy. And English was her main subject. Then when she qualified and she had moved to England, she studied an MA in English Literature at Warwick University. And she then, like myself, became a school teacher. She was a secondary school teacher teaching drama in schools, and she did that for 10 years. And much of that 10 years was part-time. And obviously, therefore, she had been home educating, like myself, our children for 12 plus years, going on 13 shortly. So I hope you see that when you see this, you can see that we both complement each other quite well in the subjects that we cover with humanities, sciences, mathematical sciences, and modern foreign languages, and obviously drama and other bits and pieces we picked up along the way, music and art and so on. So I'll just tell you a little bit about our educational story, about why we've decided to do what we're doing, and the fruits of our home educating. So we've always believed in a strong education in the faith. So if I were to talk to you about the fruits of that recently, before starting this Zoom today, I decided just to ask my two sons a few quick questions. My two eldest sons are 11 and 14. And I asked them what anamnesis was. And I asked them what epiclesis was. I asked them what the four cardinal virtues were. And they were able to perfectly well answer those questions. Also, what is the divine pedagogy? What's that about? And so you can see those types of questions are quite granular about the Catholic faith. So we know that. So not only do our children know, the sort of the more obvious aspects that people would know about their faith, such as the salvation history and so on. At a granular level, they really know and understand their faith, and we'll be able to see how they receive that, which is what, in fact, I'll tell you now. Yes, basically, we go through the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the big adult version, and we go through that 10 minutes a day. We've done that for the last couple of years. As we're working through that, we're about halfway through the Catechism now. And we do that in such a way that is relevant to the children, so they can grasp it. So they sort of have words explained to them, the difficult parts, and they have to return back explanations and explain what things mean. We do that just for 10 minutes every day, 5 days a week, covering 3 paragraphs at a time. So we also believe in strong academics. So as you may have seen, both my wife and myself, we come from a sort of top 10 university UK background. We also believe in a strong academic rigorous education. So, for example, our 2 eldest children, our eldest daughter, Elizabeth, she's 17. She has 10 GCSEs, being home educated. She has 8 9s and 2 8s. And as you may be, if you're not aware of the numbering system in the UK, so if you get a 9 in a particular subject, that's about equivalent to being in the top % in the UK in that particular subject. So if you're getting a string of 9s, that many, and a couple of 8s, that puts her well inside top 1% in the United Kingdom. My son Anselm has a similar experience with 9s and 8s at A level. He's got 7 now. He's got another few he's doing that are due next year. We tend to do them as we would propose to yourselves. We would do 3 different sittings, doing sort of 2, 3, or 4 at a time, with over a course of 2 years for each, starting from the age of 10. I'll go into a bit more detail about that later. So yeah, we believe in a strong academic formation of the children, and that's going forward for Elizabeth with her A levels now. She's predicted to get A's or higher in her A's or A stars in her subjects. So yeah, you can see that we believe in a strong academic background. We also have made sure that our children have been provided with various other arts, drama, and music. So all of our children have been required to learn at least 1 musical instrument, and the older ones are sort of grade 4 or grade 5 or above. We play music together, and our daughter Elizabeth plays the piano for us when we have our divine office, when we have the hymns. And there's a picture of that Elizabeth has drawn that she writes with a stylus and a sort of electronic pad. She's always had a thing for art and drawing pictures, so that's what she's interested in. And in terms of the drama, I believe, if I click on this link, we've had various drama experiences over the years. At the moment, we put on 2 plays every year. Last play we put on at Easter, an Easter Passion, where we had 50 people, including the children who were there. And our children went along to an art class for many years. And the art teacher, in fact, actually wanted to provide an advert for her website, so she decided to choose one of our children to do that. And if I click on this link, hopefully a YouTube video will come up. I'll just pause that video for a second. So this is our son Francesco. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see that, Annalisa? Maybe give me a nod or something. Okay, thank you. So yeah, this video was done by Art K. She decided to choose our son to do it, and you can see that there are 172,000 views on that video. So we've tried to provide quite a wide sort of range of experiences for our children in terms of other sort of intellectual avenues other than just the academic side. We have a strong life of prayer in our house. So we have the divine office in the mornings, and that will be incorporated, and we'll see a bit more about that later. We also have, Catechism of the Catholic Church gone through 5 days a week in the morning, and then in the evening we have the divine office again, followed by reading of the Bible. So we're reading through the Bible, which takes the way that we've planned it out. It will take about 2.5 years to read from cover to cover. We're doing 2 chapters 5 days a week. And the children are sort of reading, and us as well, the adults, we're sort of reading a paragraph and taking it round to sort of read it round in a circle. So that means we're all sort of having to keep up with where we are. We've all got our own copy of the Bible, and we're using the Good News translation. It's a Catholic Bible version of the Good News translation, which means it's really easy for the children to understand what's going on. Obviously, a lot of the Old Testament people can get bogged down in and lost at and give up, whereas because we've got the Good News translation, it makes it a lot easier for us all to understand, sort of like a bedtime reading. Nobody's getting sort of bogged down in difficult words and technical language that people find difficult to understand. We also have a time of silent prayer, 10 minutes of silent prayer, and our children are taught how to use that period of 10-minute prayer. I'd also, just coming back to the divine office, I'd say, we know that our children have a good life of prayer, not just because we do lots of things, but because we know that they have a great relationship with Jesus. So, for example, this isn't true of our younger son, who's 5. He's still working on his sort of relationship with God. We can tell from the intercessory prayers that we do, which are part of the divine office. The children tack on, their own intercessory prayers, as we do as well, in the intercessory prayer time, and it gives you an idea of the spiritual life of the child when you hear about what they're praying about. So with Gabriel, because he's only 5, he's focused on some material sort of toy that he'd like to get, whereas the other children are much more focused on the spiritual life in the intercessions that they're asking for, in the way that they pray for other people, pray for people we know, but also to pray for ourselves and our families. We can tell that they have a good, strong relationship with Jesus. So after the period of, so we have a sort of 10-minute period of silent prayer as well. And the children are told, how to use that silent prayer time. I'll come on to a bit later. And we also try to get them to live a life of charity. So there are various ways that we do that. And if I were just to give you something that, like today, for example, we try to live out the virtue of charity, the love of God, by loving other people, or loving God in other people. So today, for example, my 9-year-old daughter, Helena, she received a chocolate from an old lady at Mass this morning, and she decided to give it to her sister, her eldest sister, Elizabeth, who felt that she'd missed out and wasn't getting one because the lady was only handing them out to the very young children under 10. Even though Helena didn't have another one for herself, it was a Cadbury's flake. And then when we got home, she opened up the dryer, put the clothes in the basket, went up to our bedroom, emptied them on the bed, put them into piles for different children or different people, including myself and my wife, to pick up our clothes and put them away. And then my son Anselm, who's 14, he helped my daughter Elizabeth, who's 17, who happened to be leading the children's liturgy today, and she had some paper fasteners in a little box, and they all fell out all over the floor, and Anselm happened to notice that, so he stopped what he was doing and went down to help her pick them all up. And I'll explain a little bit about why our children have ended up being like that and doing those types of things. as we look at the timetables a bit later. So because of all of these things, my wife and myself, we feel a great sort of weight of responsibility on us to share with other people what we have learned and what experienced in our family. And so therefore we've decided to open the Virtue Academy. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at a sort of an overview of what we're trying to achieve with the Virtue Academy. So we're based on virtues. So the Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they taught that happiness and fulfillment are found in a life of virtue. So, for example, they would give, Aristotle gave two examples. He said, if we look at a shoemaker, the shoemaker feels happy and fulfilled when he's worked hard at his skills, learnt his trade, and can produce some good high quality shoes. And he feels proud at what he's done and happy and fulfilled. And equally, Aristotle tells us about the flute player who will learn and practice hard for many years to become an accomplished flute player so they can play some amazing songs. And in so doing so, they will feel happy and fulfilled by working away at those habits and inculcating that virtue of being able to play well and finding happiness and fulfillment in that. And then Aristotle and these other Greek philosophers thought about what is it that's distinctive about the human person? So what's distinctive about the flute player is they play the flute. What is distinctive about the person who's a shoemaker is they make shoes. But what about the human person? What is distinctive about them? What can they work on? What are their virtues? And they came to the conclusion that what is distinctive about the human person is the human mind. That unlike any other created reality, whether that be a rock or a plant or a cat or a dog, we have a much higher capacity within our mind. And therefore, the instrument of the human person then is the mind. And so they believe that by working hard on the mind, then one can achieve happiness and fulfillment. And working on the mind isn't just literally what they would call the intellectual virtues. They also talked about the moral virtues, that when you make a moral decision, you are using your mind. So the mind isn't to be trapped just in this idea of academia or learning skills, playing a musical instrument or learning a bicycle. It also is encapsulated, or what's included is the life of virtue. And they mentioned four, what they call cardinal virtues, and we'll see those later, which are moral virtues. So by the human person working at being moral, being just, by being prudent, by being fortuitous, and by being temperate, the person is able to become happy and fulfilled because they're learning to be in control of themselves. They're learning to use their mind in a correct way, and they become happy and fulfilled in doing that. So, for example, if you were to consider, for example, the virtue of temperance, this is a virtue about self-control, and somebody who is able to control from the power of their mind to control their emotions, their feelings, and their base desires. They can become happy by being in control of themselves by using their mind. So therefore, happiness and fulfillment are found in a life of virtue, as we get from the Greeks in terms of increasing and learning more virtues in the intellectual virtues of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom in all sorts of varieties of different ways, and not just the world of academia, but in various skills that one can acquire, such as riding a bicycle, for example. One can become an accomplished BMX rider with learning all sorts of stunts, but also in the moral life. And that's how the Greeks understood it. And then coming into the Christian era, St. Paul writes about what we understand as the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. And we take on in Christianity a new understanding of the virtues. So in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, for example, we see that the goal of a virtuous life is to become like God. And the reason why the goal of the virtuous life is to become like God, how the virtues enable us to become like God, is because the virtues are actually just human descriptions of who God is. So if we look at the cardinal virtues, for example, who is it who is ultimate, who is prudent? It is God. Who has ultimate justice? It is God. Who is in total control, or in human terms, temperate? It's God. Who is in complete control? It's God. And in terms of the human language, we're called to the virtue of fortitude, of not being afraid. God is not afraid. And so therefore, when we are learning the virtues, we are becoming like God. And that is our destiny, to become like God and to share God's life in heaven. So therefore, the virtuous life, if you were to hang Catholicism on anything, it would be the virtuous life. The entirety of the Catholic faith can be explained through the lens of the virtuous life, because it's the virtuous life that is there to enable us to become like God. And that is why in the Penny Catechism, question 8, it says, "What must you do to save your soul?" And the answer is, I must have faith, hope, and charity. If we don't have faith, which is to believe in God and everything that he revealed, if we don't have hope, which is that belief that, we are going to live with God in heaven and to have that hope, and charity, which is love of God, then we can't become like God. We can't become like God if we don't have faith, hope, and charity. So these are the things that Catholicism really sit on. So the entirety of the Catholic faith can be explained in terms of the virtues, whether that's the sacraments that enable us to enter into the life of faith, hope, and charity, or the Eucharist, which is called the sacrament of love, which of course is charity. Even if we just looked, there's the creed, there's the sacraments, prayer, the moral life. It all hinges on the virtues. So if we were just to look at the Eucharist, for example, when you go up to receive the Eucharist, when the priest says, Corpus Christi, or he says, the body of Christ, and we say Amen, we are making an intellectual assent to say, yes, I believe, I have faith that this is Jesus Christ, body and blood, soul and divinity. So we have faith. So faith is there, which is the belief in God. We are believing what is in front of us is God. And we have a hope in the Eucharist, in taking the Eucharist into ourselves. We have hope that God is living in us and will take us to heaven. And then, of course, the Eucharist itself is called the sacrament of love. So even the Eucharist, for example, can be explained in terms of the virtues. And you can do that with the rest of Catholicism, can be explained literally in terms of the virtues. So thereby, by focusing on the virtues and explaining everything relating to the virtues, therefore, we are then doing what the Catechism says is reaching for the goal of the virtuous life, which is to become like God and taking on his qualities so we are ready to enter heaven. Okay. Now, the academics tell us that the best way to get people to learn virtues is that the virtues are caught, they are taught, and they are sought. And I'll explain what those three things mean. So caught, i.e. you catch it off somebody else. And children naturally will catch it off from their parents and their teachers. And they may catch some virtue from those they meet at school, or potentially vices can be caught as well. So this is where you're sort of learning by experience, by seeing other people. And the taught is not only teaching the child what is right and wrong, for example, but actually to be really taught the virtues, the child needs to be taught virtues in an academic sense, so they understand what each of the virtues are, because they can't seek for the different virtues if they don't know what they are, they haven't been told what they are. So therefore, we believe that actually having academic lessons on a regular basis, teaching about the virtues, enables them to understand the totalities of what virtues are out there and how to obtain them, and maybe learn about saints that had them, for example. But also the taught side is to ensure the child has a panoramic view of the purpose of what virtues are about. They see that in the life of virtue, they can become and share in the life of God. And when they do that, and when they realize and are taught and understand that the way to be happy, the way to find fulfillment in your life is to grow in virtues. When they're taught that and they take it on board, you then move on to the third one, which is sought. The child actually wants and seeks out virtue. Most children don't get to that sought stage because they haven't been taught about the virtues properly. They've largely been taught, maybe a little bit of taught, and they rarely get to the sought stage because, they haven't been taught. And our children, and we think that other people's can too, can really seek out and want to be virtuous and do that on at various times throughout the day. So we're trying to inculcate those three ways of teaching virtues in the program that we have. So I'll just very quickly go through these, or maybe so first of all, the intellectual virtues. Now, the intellectual virtues, Thomas Aquinas says they are required for every single virtue, because all the virtues require on the thought of the mind, the intellect, or the intus. It's not possible to have any virtue without the intellect. So the intellect provides, if you like, the foundation stone for all of the other virtues. Without the intellect, there can be no virtue. Now, the intellectual virtues have classically been understood as knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And this knowledge and understanding and wisdom then comes in a variety of different virtues that might be academic, might be physics, math, or it could be, computing, could be English, but also could be riding a bicycle, or how to cook, or how to, fly an airplane, or whatever it might happen to be. All of these areas sit in the intellectual virtues. Even if you think, for example, of I don't know, like a ballerina, you may think, or a gardener, let's say. Although they are using their physical body, it is their mind that is driving them. If they didn't have them, their mind is controlling, with the neurons, and has taught the muscles of how to move. Let's say in football or in ballet, for example, the mind has taught and exercised itself and controlled the parts of the body to reach fulfillment in that particular virtue. So going on from there. So on top of the intellectual virtues, then you then have the moral virtues, that in order to grow as a human person, we can't just have intellectual virtue. We can't just be good at football, physics, or math. We actually need to be good as a person to really flourish. A human person can't flourish if they don't have temperance, or if they're a bit weak and fear. Maybe they've got all sorts of problems or phobias. Then obviously they're not going to be the sort of happy, fulfilled person. They're lacking in fortitude, or if someone doesn't know the difference between right or wrong, they're going to make all sorts of mistakes in their life, and they're not going to be happy in their life. Whereas the virtue of justice, if they have that, they are aware of what is right and what is wrong. In basic terms, and that prudence sort of sits on top of those three, because prudence is a form of is the moral wisdom. So in the intellectual virtues, there's a wisdom in each area of the different types of intellectual virtues you might have. You may become very wise and knowledgeable about Formula One, for example, as one of my children likes to talk about. But prudence is not to be confused with the wisdom in the intellectual virtue. So prudence is a moral is a moral virtue. Prudence is about knowing what to do in a given circumstance from a moral point of view. So the prudent person is able to be prudent because they've got justice. They've got that bedrock of knowing in general terms what is right and what is wrong. They have the fortitude to be able to carry out what is right or wrong, and they have the self-control enables them to be able to carry out what is right or wrong. So prudence, in the Catechism, the Catechism talks about prudence as the chariot of the virtues. Of the moral virtues, that is. And when a person acquires prudence through experience and growing in justice, fortitude, temperance, and other intellectual virtues, that person now knows how to experience and to give human love. They know how to love as a human person. When our children get married, we would love our children to know all of these virtues just from a human point of view, so they know how to love somebody. It's not possible to love somebody if you don't have temperance. If you're if you're unfaithful, for example, you can't control yourself, or you don't know that lying is wrong, for example, which would sit under justice. So by growing in these human virtues, then you are then able to acquire human love, and that's open to anybody as a human person because they're made in God's image and likeness. And so, although these are human virtues, they ultimately come from God by coming through the fact that we are made in God's image and likeness. And God's grace assists people in reaching a high level in all of those human virtues. Moving on from there, then, we have what Thomas Aquinas called the divine virtues, or what we call nowadays the theological virtues. But Thomas Aquinas called them the divine virtues because they lead us directly to God. They enable us to become like God, most especially. So although the moral and the intellectual virtues, they enable us to become like God, the theological virtues, or as Thomas Aquinas called them, the divine virtues, especially help us to take on the characteristics of God. And there's a progression in the theological virtues. Now, the theological virtues are not virtues that you can acquire by yourself. So the human virtues below are called acquired virtues, and the infused virtues are faith, hope, and charity. And these are the ones above. You can't get them unless God gives them to you, and people grow in them gradually. So what happens is as somebody becomes open to believing in God, they get baptized, they receive in the sacrament of baptism faith in a seed form, and then by opening themselves up to learn about who God is and learn the creed and what things are for, then God can pour in more faith into that person for them to have a stronger belief in God and a stronger understanding of who God is and what is true. And when one in the mind understands at a human level, at least, who is God, then one can start to hope in God. We can start to place our hope in God. Now, the virtue of hope, people think or explain hope in terms of hoping for heaven. But what is heaven? Heaven is the presence of God. So hope is about wishing to be in the presence of God in the future, which we can experience obviously here on earth now as well, and we can grow in that experience of the love of God and God's love for us. And that relationship through hope. So hope is fundamentally about a human relationship, about a personal relationship with God. And love of God it's just that. It's putting God first before all else. And in order to put God before all else, we do need the other human virtues. The other human virtues assist and enable us to love God. Saint John, in his first letter, said, he said, how can you say that you love God if you do not love the person who you can see? How can you love the God you cannot see if you don't love the person that you can see? So we need all of these human virtues in order to understand love from a human perspective. And then by using faith and hope, we are allowed to enter into this world of loving God. And when we love God, that also includes loving God by loving other people. So Mother Teresa, for example, when she saw the sick and the people that needed help, she would see Christ in them and want to help them for the love of God. So that's distinct from human love. So a human love is you are loving person from a natural level, like they're your child or they're your brother or your sister or your neighbor. But the divine virtue of love of God is loving God and loving other people, and we only loving those other people because we love God and God is in them. So it's different from human love. Okay, I'll move on. So all of these here together then make up what is education. So yes, it includes the down the bottom, the intellectual virtues of skills and academia and so on, but also growth in how to be a moral person, how to give and experience human love, and how to love God and to reach our full fulfillment in Him. So that is the totality of education. Now, you may well notice that this full or description of education is not something that children only do until they're 18. So people are going to continue to grow in these virtues. They're going to continue to want to love God more as they grow older in their life. So the education that we are proposing is not some sort of version where children learn one type of education and then they have to learn a completely different new way of educating after they've left school, because that's currently what happens. When people leave school, they do not sit in a classroom of 30 people to be taught about the love of God for the next 60 years after they've already got to 18, for example. So we are saying, right, the education that adults get, we're going to bring that right back as early as we can, and put into children a way of what we call independent learning. And Plato said the only education worthy of the name of education is virtue formation. So I very much see education as being synonymous with virtue. Virtue is education. Education is virtue. It's the same word, means the same thing to me, at least. Okay, we're going to use some of the educational methods of Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas Aquinas, he wrote a document which was actually a speech that he gave to students at the University of Paris on his second visit there. And it was called Puer Iesus, which means the boy Jesus. And in this lecture he gave, he said that the ultimate or the best or the most perfect example of how to learn is to look at Luke chapter 2, which was about Jesus as a boy in the temple, where he was in the temple. He wasn't sitting in a classroom of 30 children. It was a bespoke education. He had a personal sort of relationship with the teachers of the law, that he was able to ask the questions, and he was able to answer the questions that he was set, and he was given this sort of bespoke, personalized education when he went there. And Thomas Aquinas says that when Jesus left there, he was growing in wisdom and stature and in favor of God and men, as we find in Luke chapter 2. And Thomas Aquinas equates these to the virtues. So in the first one, increasing in wisdom, he related this to the intellectual virtues. And in stature, again, the intellectual virtues of growing to be in control of your bodies. We grow up, we are able to mature in our bodies, and our mind, which controls our bodies, and in favor with God and in man. So, and in favor with, I'll do man first. So that is growing in the moral virtues. If you are a moral person, people like people who tell the truth. People want to get married to somebody who's virtuous. So Thomas Aquinas is saying that to understand this part of in favor with man, Jesus was growing in favor with man. He was saying he was, growing in the moral life. And that is what we want to be doing. And then in favor with God, he then equated that to the divine virtues, the theological virtues, that in favor with God, in faith, hope, and charity. So that's what that's the sort of the example that Thomas Aquinas gave of the best way to be that people should be looking to get educated. He also talked about a method which he called reading, disputing, and repeating. So we use that wherever we can. So, for example, we would use that when we do the catechism in the morning. So first of all, we read the catechism. So we'll read the 3 paragraphs. People have their own copy. And we do this with our children. And we'll read through the 3 paragraphs first. And as we're reading, we'll sort of stop when we come across some bits that might be difficult to understand. And I might sort of do a bit of engage in some questioning. So that sort of reminds us again of Jesus in the temple as a boy. I'm asking questions of the children, making sure they understand the bits and the words they might not have seen before. And then lastly, there's repeating. As I get the children, I go around the table, and all the children have to say something that they've understood about what the catechism has said in those 3 paragraphs. And we try to tease out and get the children to repeat back the meaning of the 3 different paragraphs. So that's just one way of maybe explaining what those 3 are. Now, while I'm talking about I'll move on. I'll do that a bit later. Okay, so Thomas Aquinas said that when Jesus said, "Call no man teacher," that Thomas Aquinas believed that Jesus was being literal. He said that in fact there is no teacher except God, and that the people who we call teachers in inverted commas are more like mentors. So he described what a teacher is, for example, in a couple of analogies. One of those analogies would be that of a doctor. So if we're going back to sort of 13th century medicine, the way that medicine worked at that time is that the doctors, they wouldn't be able to make their own medicine out of nothing. They'd have to take it from the natural world that was around them and apply it to, discern the needs and diagnose what was wrong with the person. And that medicine then would assist the body in repairing itself. So he described that way of the doctor assisting the body of repairing itself in an analogous way to how education works. So Thomas would say that the teacher is God, and the pupil is learning directly from God. And the purpose of the teacher then is to assist that education taking place. And so we perceive in that a calling towards independent learning, and the teacher being a facilitator and a mentor to the child, a bit like so helping the apprentice learn a skill. So therefore, our education then is based on as conceptual idea of independent learning along with group activities. So if there is to be individualized independent learning going on, then that means there isn't a timetable for year groups. It simply doesn't work like that. There are no classroom of 30 children. There are no year groups where all children are doing the same thing. That doesn't happen. That's not what happens in real life. We don't want to be replicating we want to be replicating how people learn independently when they're older and bring it to a much younger age to prepare them to continue that journey through to the end of their lives. And so in order to do that, then that means that we have a bespoke timetable for each child. So each child is learning a different thing than the child next to him or her when they are undertaking their independent learning. And then, as I said before, there are various activities that they come to do, for group activities to do together, that for certain aspects that you can't do on your own. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, so it's a mixture of group activities and independent learning that's led by mentors. Okay, so we're going to have a look at two sort of mocked up pretend timetables here. So we can pretend this is a primary school timetable for a child. So this won't be the same for every child. There'll be some parts that are common. And then afterwards, we'll look at the secondary level. Now, the first thing I'd like to mention about the primary school timetable is that we will be taking children who would be at the level of equivalent of starting year 3. So we are expecting that the child has already gone through infant school, whether that's being home educated by the parents up to a certain level, or whether that child has been to school. Now, it's not about how old the child is. It's about when they have reached the level of being at about year 3. So in order for us to allow people to come in at the primary level, they would take both a maths and an English SATs exam that they would be expected to pass. Because the independent learning is will be very cost heavy at a sort of 4, 5, 6-year-old, where they're going to need to have one-to-one attention if we were to incorporate that, and that wouldn't be financially viable to have one adult sitting with every single child at that age of 4, 5, 6. So we expect them to be at a certain level where they've already mastered some basic techniques of maths and English. They passed the Key Stage 1 SATs exam, so they're then ready for independent learning, where they don't have to have a personal teacher sitting next to them the whole time on a one-to-one basis. Now, some people will home educate, some people will send their child to school, and different children will be at different ages. So some might be ready at the age of 6, Some might even be only ready when they're about 9 years old. So children will be starting this primary timetable at a time that is appropriate for them. Now, you'll notice that it starts at 9:30. We actually start our house sort of 7 o'clock, and we started it a bit later because we acknowledged that, well, if parents then have younger children who are going to go to school because they can't yet come to our academy, they'll need to have time to take them there in the morning, and they'll also need to have time to travel to us. So we are thinking that if children who are in school are taken to a breakfast club at 8 o'clock, something like that, if they do live an hour away, they've then got an hour and a half to get to us before we start our timetable at 9:30. And equally down the bottom, by finishing at 5:25, in fact, 5:45, that's given more than enough time, hopefully, for those who may even be an hour away to have picked up the children from the infant school at 3 o'clock, 3:30, and then they've got plenty of time to come back here to pick up the older children. And that's why we've done that timing. Now, these timings are open for debate. We're happy to talk to parents about their particular situation. These times is just what we have come up with, and other times might maybe parents that do come might want to have an earlier time. We're happy to talk about that. It's not a problem. Okay, so I'll just explain a little bit about the colors here. So the blue are the parts that take place in home. So people now, and again, the days in which we actually do the academy, we've just put them as Tuesday and Thursday, but they could be other days. It's up for discussion. So Monday and Wednesday and Friday in this example timetable, then people are learning and working at home. And the Tuesday and the Thursday, they are in the academy. Now, in the academy, there's the yellow and the red. The yellow parts are the parts where children are undertaking their own independent study, where they are mentored. They have their own. Each person has their nominated. Basically, it'll be a qualified teacher who is their mentor, who'll be checking what they're doing, making sure they're doing their work, making sure they're able to adequately mark their own work where possible, and where it needs an adult to mark the work, then they will be undertaking that. So yeah, the yellow parts are the independent study. Although, yeah, lunch break, actually, that should probably be in red, actually, but never mind. Oops. Oh, so I went to the secondary one. Yeah. So yeah, the parts in red then are sort of group activities. So we'll start off with 9:30 with a divine office. Now the divine office is the official prayer of the church. The official prayer of the church is the prayer that goes back to the apostles when they were praying in the upper room for the Holy Spirit to come. So we're really joining in with the history of the church, and people around the world are joining in the divine office. And the Second Vatican Council called more and more lay people in groups and individually to pray the divine office. So we are answering the call of the Second Vatican Council to do that by getting even children to participate in the divine office. Also, you can imagine if we had a 5 or a 6-year-old who can't read, they're not going to be able to join in with the divine office. They're not going to have much of an attention span for sort of, for silent prayer and so on. So that's another reason why we're starting it with those who've already can pass the Key Stage 1 SATS exam. So with the divine office, it's our children as a family, we used to pray the rosary every day, and we moved to the divine office, and the children much prefer it. And I think the reasons for that generally is because it's a lot more varied. There's a hymn, there are psalms that we sing, and we'll teach your children how to chant the psalms. There's the scripture reading. There's the intercessions and prayers and the Our Father. There's a lot more variety. And also by the fact that the children have a book in front of them they're reading, it keeps their attention much more on the prayers and the rosary, where their mind can wander if they're trying to pray 5 decades of the rosary. And the children also, we found, really have enjoyed praying the divine office because they love finding the right page and getting to the right place and telling us what page we're on next. We've been, praying the divine office with our children, I probably say for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, 3 and a half, 4 years. And it's children who can read are capable of doing the divine office. It's not a problem. I guess we started it, with a 7-year-old doing the divine office. So some people might think, oh, a child can't do it. Actually, they can. And I would say that by not allowing them to do the divine office, you're sort of preventing a barrier on them. They can do a lot more than you think they can do, and they're capable of more. And equally with the catechism, we have, at our house, we've got sort of eight. We've done catechism for a couple of years now, where we go through the actual full adult catechism. Obviously, a 4 and a 5-year-old aren't going to be able to get very much out of that, if at all, I would say. And we have a 5-year-old, and he doesn't really sort of join in with us. But the next one up can. The children in junior school can do the catechism, where they have their own copy, they're reading it, and they are stopped every so often when there's a difficult bit that needs to be explained, or we can ask them questions about what they might have understood about that. And then lastly to repeat back using the Thomas Aquinas method of reading, disputing, and repeating. And we use that in the catechism, as I've mentioned before, but we would also use that method also in other aspects, which actually come into the secondary timetable, where we do apologetics and various other bits and pieces, and history and good books and so on. Right. I might as well. So I've explained about the divine office and the catechism. Just to explain down the bottom about the Bible. With a catechism, your child will go through the catechism over a period of 5 years from cover to cover. That will mean that over 10 years, they would have gone through the catechism twice. And when they go through it the second time, obviously they'll be at a maturer level and pick out more out of it. But your children, will be very highly versed in the teachings of the church at a granular level, far more than 99%, more than 99% of Catholics will not understand a catechism like your children would do. They'll know it better than you do, or maybe not if you're doing it at home, because you can see we've got it at home as well on these other days. Now, what we are going to do to assist people at home with the divine office and catechism, as you can see, it's also on the blue days. We'd like people to be doing this at home. Is that we invite parents to come and join in and see the divine office and the catechism. If they want to stay for that, they can on the 2 days. Also, we are looking to have a YouTube account where the divine office and the catechism will be done on there. So even if you're going home and attempting to do the catechism, but you don't feel up to doing that yourself, you can rely on the YouTube video to provide you. Either you can watch it before to give yourself pointers to things to look out for and explain to your child, or you could even just have the YouTube session with your child potentially. We'll leave that to how you might want to do that at home too. But if you weren't doing it at home, then you wouldn't be getting the full catechism, because with the catechism, and the same with the Bible further down here, where we're doing the Bible on a daily basis, we are assuming that you are going to continue that at home. So you'll be missing out paragraphs if you're not doing that at home. Okay, down here with the Bible, then. With the Bible, it will take a 2.5 year course to go through the entire Bible from cover to cover. And when we do that as a group, and people will generally read 2 chapters each, a paragraph each. They'll read a paragraph each to get through those 2 chapters. And each child has their own copy of the Good News Bible, and that ensures that they're reading and paying attention, because they know they're going to their paragraph is going to have to come up. They can't necessarily know where it is. They have to be reading it to know when it's coming up. And again, we couldn't really do this with 4, 5, 6-year-olds. So we're looking at people having got to a certain sort of finished already infant school. The silent prayer, the children are taught how to do silent prayer, the things they can do, the various activities that they can be doing during their silent prayer. And just to mention about the virtues now. So the virtues, so obviously, we can see there's intellectual virtues going on here. We can see that through the divine office, people are increasing in the virtue of hope, of obtaining a relationship with God by praying and talking to God. And then with the Mass here on the Thursday, we've got Mass weekly. We have a priest from the Ordinariate. And their rite is a traditional rite that's in English. So it has some parts that are similar to the Latin Mass. So, for example, kneeling down for Holy Communion on the tongue, with the priest facing ad orientem, but it's in the vernacular in English. So it's sort of like a medium between sort of the Novus Ordo and the Latin rite. So yeah, the growing in the virtue of love of God through the worship of God at Mass. And through this silent prayer, or at the end of that silent prayer, and we then basically go around and talk about how individually each one of us has exercised the divine virtue of love of God by loving others. So the children during the day are expected to go above and beyond and to do something for somebody else that they've not been asked to do. So yes, there are various things they are asked to do as well, but then to actually do something extra. Now, when we started doing, and they do this on a daily basis at the end, so they can use the silent prayer to talk to Jesus about what they've done, as well as some of the other activities that they could do during the silent prayer. But after the silent prayer, we have an open session where people will say, today I noticed so-and-so do something for me. They did, made me a cup of coffee or whatever it might happen to have been. And then, if there are children who haven't had something said about them, they are then encouraged to say something that they have done or just to admit they haven't done anything. And we do that on a daily basis. We wouldn't be doing it on a Thursday because we have Mass then, but we'd be hoping that the children will do that at home with their parents. And how that's worked for us as we've been on a journey doing that. So when we first started, basically everyone just admitted we haven't done anything. But gradually over time, people start doing things. So it starts off with small little things like, I turned my bedroom light off after my brother forgot to turn it off. I saw he left it on. Little things like it starts with that. And then gradually matures and gets into bigger and bigger things. And that's how we've been able to grow in those in inculcating into the children this idea of every day, what have you done to go above and beyond? And that's why when I mentioned earlier about the things that our children are doing and why they're doing it, that's why, because they've been through this process since September of doing that. Yes, they're called up to explain about how they've loved God through loving others by going above and beyond to do something. Okay, now Annalise is going to talk briefly about the sort of lessons that are here, or the times on here. So I'll just mute myself, and it's over to you, Annalisa.
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm just going to start talking about English. So the trickiest elements of English are composition, creative writing, and comprehension. Those are skills that will be taught in the academy, and homework will be set for your child to do. In terms of grammar, grammar tends to be an easier topic to learn and to practice. And it's something that can be quite easily graded and assessed. So the children obviously will be explained grammar points in the academy, and then they'll be given homework to complete at home, which they can assess themselves. We have decided to cover all the maths in the academy. And maybe Peter, you should explain why you have made such a decision.
Okay, yeah. So the English that's being done at home then is being marked by the children. There is an answer book with correct answers, and they can easily mark themselves. So with the independent learning, we're really trying to get, where possible, to children to be marking their own work, and all our children have done that from the age of sort of 6 or 7 onwards. They've learned how to work them mark. But in the English there are some aspects where they're not capable of doing that, and the teacher will assess that. So to move on to the math, so that the difficult parts of English and all of the maths are done on the Tuesday and Thursday. And the reason why we do that, and if I deal with the maths, for example, is that both of us have found that Other home educators that we have met have often struggled to get their children up to a high level for maths and English when they home educate. And often, people say to us, "Oh, I can't believe you used that book. That's so difficult. I could never get my child to use that book." But we use the same textbook. The basics used by sort of grammar schools and independent schools for maths and English. And we use those books even for people who, some of our children have dyslexia and attention deficit. And it just means that, we're not lowering the bar in terms of their education. We're not saying, "I'm sorry, you're not intelligent enough to do this work." They get given the same work and they can do it, and they do improve and they do get better and they do thrive. It just takes them longer to go through it and to get through it. But that's fine, because they need that extra time. And that's potentially why children have difficulty in the classroom, where they have some sort of learning difficulties, because the teacher will just go on because they have to for everybody else. But in this independent learning method, they can go at their own pace. Now, with regards to the maths, so lots of children, whether they go to school or some that are home educated, I have found, have basically ended up hating maths. And I think the reason, and that hasn't happened to any of our children. In fact, if you ask all of our older children, their favorite subject is maths. Now, with maths, when you learn maths at a lower level, you can get by with certain techniques. So let's take fractions, for example. You can get by learning certain techniques that can help you to get the right answer in fractions. But as the fractions gets more and more difficult, suddenly that particular tool or way of doing the fractions doesn't work anymore. And what happens is the children then gets cut off and ostracized from doing fractions. And this happens to children in school because they don't have like they don't have an independent learning method where they're sort of, have a mentor that's watching carefully what they're doing and explaining what they need. And they'll lapse into their own sort of ways of doing maths. But equally, parents who don't come from a maths higher education background will potentially be teaching their children tools in maths that actually are no good for later on when things get harder. And then the child struggles and can't do it and ends up hating maths. And I remember when I was a child, when I started A-level maths, when suddenly it got harder, I had to learn to unlearn the things. I had to go through this difficult process of chucking out and taking on the correct way of doing fractions and algebra and a variety of other maths ways, so that I can then go up to the higher levels. So we are keeping the maths in the lessons to ensure that the children get taught the proper, the best ways or the best tools for doing maths at an early age. They can easily thrive and do well further on later in their maths. So, for example, when you're getting into A-level maths, you really need to know how to set out your workings effectively to be able to arrive at an answer with many, potentially even pages of writing to get to the answer. Whereas at a primary level, you can get by sort of doing it in your head so much and not having to worry about how to lay out an answer effectively on a piece of paper. So even from a young age, from when they're 6, 7 years old, we're teaching the children how to lay out neatly their maths work. So there's a logical progression in what they're doing, preparing them for when they're doing maths. Even much later at A-levels, they're being prepared for that from the age of sort of 7 onwards. Okay, I think you can take over, Annalisa.
Yes, and equally in English, there will be great focus on composition, creative writing, comprehension, which are key skills for the workplace, and also they lead to all the skills they need to gain top grades at their GCSE level and A-level English, if they wish to do A-level English. In terms of English composition, we also like to join children's writing competitions, some local ones and some national ones. That is a good way to assess where the children are and how well they are progressing. And I think it's a good challenge for them as well. We have been successful in writing competition with our own children. And so we look forward to helping other children succeed in English as well. moving on with the timetable, we like to put emphasis on foreign languages. We do think that learning a foreign language is quite essential for a healthy development of the human brain. It does open up doors, and we have decided to focus on Italian and French. We have established very good relationships with outstanding tutors who teach up to A level and who have helped our children gain top grades at GCSE languages. I am Italian myself, and there are a couple of similar Catholic academies, such as the one we're trying to set up in Italy. And so that also opens up the possibility of having sort of an exchange, a school exchange program, visiting Italy, visiting the other academy, having children write to each other in the foreign language. And obviously, me being Italian, I can share my knowledge of Italy and expose them to Italian culture. History will be taught very differently from how it is taught in most schools in England. So we take a classical chronological approach to history. And the children will be studying the history of Western civilization at primary level, starting from right at the beginning of civilization up to present times. At the same time, it will be done through an unbiased and Catholic Christian lens, which means that the children will see how God works through history, how there is a continuum in history. It is not just a series of disjointed events, but it is ultimately the history of salvation. And that way, in schools, normally the schools would cover different areas of history, different times of history, but it would be a very disjointed approach. Whereas the way we have chosen to do with our children and in the academy would be a classical, traditional, chronological approach. So we would be using various resources such as, I can't see it, but the story of civilization. And then after that, Light to the Nations. So in primary, there'll be an emphasis on the history of Western civilization. When they get to secondary level, it will open up to the history of America, Africa, Asia, etc. Again, in the academy, the bulk of the teaching will be done, and homework will be set to consolidate the learning that they do in the academy. We also believe that children should be trained in public speaking. It is an essential skill, whichever work you choose to do, they choose to do in the future, or whether they just want to become parents, whichever path they choose. We think that's something they need to nurture and develop. So we do have a drama class which will stretch the children and help them develop different skills. We will be performing plays for the community. At the moment, we have been performing 2 plays a year. A nativity play, which is not the usual, I would say, nativity play you would normally see in a primary school. It is a nativity play where actors have let's say, range from pupils in year 3 all the way up to A levels. And they are immersive plays where the audience follows the actors around, and the audience sort of taken to the time when Jesus was born. We use a variety of scripts. We use scripture as well. And our plays have been, the community has been very appreciative of the plays. They've all really enjoyed them. and they've encouraged us to carry on with them. So that's something that we wish to do again in the future. And then Easter, we have an Easter Passion Play, which is again an immersive experience where the audience follows the actors around. Also, we will have an art tutor, again, to develop more creative skills, French with a French tutor, and we also will encourage children to work on a creative project. This is for the children to develop independent learning and entrepreneurial skills. The creative projects will be different from term to term. So it could be an Italian creative project, it could be to do with French, it could be a computer science project. It will be something that the children themselves will create, and they will have to present it in the academy. And that way they will be able to consolidate their learning in all the different areas and use their learning to create something themselves.
Okay, thank you, Annalisa. Just to pick out a couple of things in here. On the Thursday, we've got an hour for the virtue lesson. So as I mentioned before, we're looking to academically teach about the virtues, so they understand what they are for, how all these different virtues fit together to assist them on their journey towards happiness, fulfillment that is found in God. Now, as well as that hour, on the Sundays, what we are hoping parents will do, which is something that we've been doing for since September, is on that Sunday for about an hour and a half each week to pick from some virtue cards that we have, 3 virtues for each child for them to be working on for a month. And each week during that hour and a half, in your sort of family confidential bubble at home, you'd be sort of essentially providing each other, including the adults would join in as well, with some spiritual direction by talking about how those virtues have been going. So a child, for example, would have their 3 virtues. The children might take it in turns to speak about their virtues. The child will be given the opportunity first to speak about the 3 virtues they've chosen and how they've gone over the last week, before sort of opening it up to the rest of the family for them to comment on how that child might have been performing from their point of view in that virtue. So it's a sort of a positive spiritual direction that takes place. We're talking about the virtues. We're not talking about what sins and vices people have got, but we're making it positive by them talking about how it's been going with them with their virtues. Now at the younger end, so more sort of 7, 8, 9-year-olds, the parents are assisting and partnering the child to help the child to pick the virtues that they need to work on first, which will be different for each child. But the older children, certainly of the secondary level, should be choosing their own virtues, and the parents allowing them to choose them, but the parent emphasizing, look, it's got to be the virtues that you have the most difficulty with. And the parents might say, you know what, I think this will be a good one for you, but ultimately letting the child decide to take it for that, because they really would need to start taking ownership to seek and to sort the sort aspect of the virtues that we talked before. We've got the court, the taught, and the sort. So the sort, then it's up to them to be able to independently choose and to be working towards the virtues. And each week, the children and the adults, as a family, in a confidential setting, so we're not talking about bragging and sharing it with people outside of the home, to be able to talk realistically about how they're growing in the virtues, and for other family members to be commenting on that. And when you do that exercise, we've found that we've learned a lot about the spiritual lives of our children that we hadn't been aware of, in particular, and also conversations and things that have been going on between siblings that we weren't aware of, that come up when another sibling might say, hang on, okay, you said that, but what about this, earlier, that happened on Wednesday or whatever. I think you might need to grow a bit more in that particular virtue because of this situation that we had on Wednesday. And when you hear all this, you really be able to, you begin, and you do it on a weekly basis, you begin to really hear and understand what's going on in your child's spiritual life. The difficulty that a lot of parents have today is they're not involved in really knowing what's going on in the spiritual thinking of their child. So often you may even have a parent who's been taking their child to daily mass for 18 years. They get to 18 and the child basically just disowns the whole Catholic faith. And the parent can often say, I don't know at what point, where it happened, where they lost the faith. But if you're doing this sort of exercise on a weekly basis, you get to know where your child is spiritually, and things will come up that they're thinking about or that someone says, and you'll be able to sort of nip bad thoughts at a very early stage before they grow and fester over many years in the mind of that child. So therefore, we're trying to really sort of push growth in the virtues, both at home and in the academy. So yeah, we're doing the academic lessons at the academy, and at home on a Sunday or a different day of the week, during the week if you need to, whenever's convenient for your family, to spend that hour and a half with your children about the virtues that they and you are trying to achieve. Okay, I'll move on to secondary now. So with the Italian and French, children would be starting to take language GCSEs, so foreign language GCSEs, from the age of about 10 or 11. And they'll do that for 2 years. So I'll explain about how we do GCSEs. And this is really part of why, our children were able to get very high grades. Even though, we had Elizabeth tested because we thought she'd get some extra time because she was diagnosed as on the autistic spectrum when she was 3, when she was in nursery. So we thought she could get, because she was actually being quite slow in her examinations that she was doing at that time. And we wanted to have a test. We got her tested, and basically she came up as sort of medium intelligence on all different forms of intelligence, but very high on the memory side. So we know that she's not like a massive high flyer, but she's been able to get these good grades because of her own hard work and diligence, and also because we've fostered this sense of independent learning where the child will get on with the GCSE. And how we do that is by them following a correspondence course. So they'll be getting on with what they've been having to do, and they'll submit their assignments as and when they fall due. And in the GCSE, they will also have, I would imagine, in order to make it cost effective, we have just a tutorial with a subject leader of that area who's an expert in that particular GCSE once a month for an hour. So a 1-to-1 with a tutor of that subject once a month for those 2 years. With the backup of the day-to-day work that's being done on my correspondence course, and they're getting fed back answers from the people that run the correspondence course, and that's how they'll sort of progress in their GCSE. So it's not a class of 30 people or even 5 people. It's that child working at their own pace, working through the materials at that GCSE, getting that monthly input from a tutor to cover up any and deal with any misconceptions and so on. And they'll do GCSEs every 2 years, from sort of starting from the age of 10. So their first exams they'll be sitting with sort of when they're 11, 12, they've been doing for 2 years. And they'll do another set of GCSEs when they're 14, which if they were in school would be year 9. And then their last set of GCSEs, the third round of GCSEs, when they're 16. That way of doing the GCSEs, of spreading them out, means that they're only sort of doing a handful at a time. And that also means they can be doing other things. So in a school where you're doing 10 GCSEs for 2 years, that means that during those 2 years, you've got very little time to do anything else. But in our method, you've got a lot of time to be doing other things that we'll see in the timetable if we move to the secondary one. But just to stay here for a moment. So we would do language GCSEs first. So they would do those when they are sort of 10, 11, 12. And I would imagine that most children would probably be 2, but some might only do 1. And then, there might be some that do 3. 3 GCSEs, there's potential to do German or Spanish, maybe. We can speak to parents about that. And it's down to the child. And also, again, they don't have, they might even take none. They might be ready for none at that age. They might need to do some might be on a trajectory where they're not academically inclined, where they want to go to college and maybe to do something that's not of an academic nature, but we would want to ensure that pretty much 99% of people that left this academy have sort of 4 or 5, passes at GCSE level, which in the state sector is probably maybe about 65% of children achieve that, and we'd be looking to get close to 99% on that. Obviously, those who are, who don't have a problem academically, and as well as those who are gifted in the academic realm, will be taking more GCSEs. And the reason why we start with the languages is because the child in the GCSE modern foreign language only needs to be at the level of a 6 or 7-year-old of a native in that country. That means they don't need to have a maturity of thought yet at that age for that GCSE. It's literally just learning the language. So, and also studies show that children by the age of 12, their mind becomes quite a sort of solid, and they find learning a language after the age of 12 actually very difficult. So by getting that one in early when they're young and starting it, the Italian and French from an early age from 7, leading up to then GCSEs to be completed in modern foreign languages by the time they're 12, gets sort of 1, 2 or 3 GCSEs out the way early. And then if I move on to the secondary timetable, with the next round of GCSEs that people would take a further 2 years later when they're sort of 14, they'd be doing GCSEs where there is a right answer. So we're talking like GCSE maths, we're talking about maybe double award science, computer studies, because those types of GCSEs where there is a right answer doesn't require the same level of maturity of thought as, say, GCSE English might do, or history, that require a higher level of maturity in the writing. We'll do those types of GCSEs last. And then we mix it up a little bit. So children who are particularly, want to move into maths and science. So for example, our son Anselm, he did GCSE maths when he was 14. He got a 9 in that. He's now doing further maths GCSE, and that will then take him up ready to do A-level maths as soon as he's finished that further maths GCSE. Equally, you might have a student who is particularly gifted in languages. They can start an AS level a bit early and be working on that when they're sort of 15, 16. If you've got someone who wants to be doing sciences as well, so Anselm, our 14-year-old, he's done all the sciences. He's also done maths GCSE already, but he wants to do physics at A level. So he's doing a separate single science in physics. He did double award that was mixed in with biology and chemistry before. So he's got the single science and he's got the further maths GCSE, really preparing him for the A level courses that he wants to do. But he's also doing the mature level thinking of writing GCSEs like English, for example, at that later date. That's that. Let me have a look at this secondary timetable, see if there's anything in here to discuss. So, so I guess one other thing to mention is that when the children are at home on the Monday, the Wednesday, and the Thursday, this is true of both primary and secondary. The parent is not expected to be doing any lesson planning. They're not expected to be doing any marking either. The child is expected to mark their own work. All our children have done that. Even those with dyslexia have done that from the age of 7, mark their own work. So the parent there at home is only really making sure that the child is getting on with the work. They are not having to... at primary level, there may be a little bit of that where the parent can assist them with their English, on their history homework and so on. But certainly at secondary level, the parent's job is just to make sure that the child is where they are meant to be. So the child will be told where they're meant to be on the correspondence course at the end of the week, and the parent will just try to ensure the child gets there. Obviously at the rate that's right for that child. And what we do in our family is basically, if you haven't finished the work, and we would recommend this, to others as well, to help the child to keep on task when they're, meant to be working by themselves. You say, look, this is where you're meant to be, and we will decide where the child is meant to be. So you'll just be aware of where they're meant to be, and to check that they are where they are meant to be by the Friday. And if they're not, our children then have to finish it on the Saturday. That incentivizes our children to then work properly at home the rest of the week, so they don't have to end up working on the Saturday to finish off their work that they have to do. But our children have done all sorts of GCSEs that we have had nothing to do with, because they've followed a correspondence course. They've had access to a subject level tutor, and so equally the parent will just be there just to make sure the child is actually doing what they're just making sure the child they're working. What else can I say? Okay, in here, this is an example timetable of someone who might be taking Latin, GCSE, science, computer studies. And the green ones in here happen to be this week, the person's having a tutorial with their maths tutor, and they're also on the Tuesday, they're having a tutorial with their science teacher. This one here, the Didache group, what that is the child is expected to be doing reading through the week. So you can see on Monday and the Wednesday that there's reading time there, and obviously the child can read at other times at home before bed or whatever. And the Didache group and also the book club over here are opportunities for the children to come together to discuss what they've been reading. So with the Didache group, there is a 4-year series of books. The first one is about the Catholic faith. The second one is about sacred scripture, understanding what's in there, going through what are the prophets, the writings, the Pentateuch, and so on, the New Testament. The third one is on the moral life, and the fourth one is the history of the church. So the children will be doing one of those books each year for 4 years, and at that Didache group, the children will be tested on what they've read orally, and they'll be expected to explain things as part of a group setting. And they would do a similar thing in the book club. So the book club is where we are, the children come together. So they're reading at home. We'll have reading lists for children, the books they're meant to be reading, to ensure they get sort of the good books experience, reading a variety of classics. And they come to the book club on the Thursday to be able to defend the book that they're reading and to explain it to others. And because we are really trying to assist children at an early age to become independent learners and get on and work, we're also setting them up to carry on that reading after they've left school, because it's not possible to read the full body of great literature. It's a journey that takes place throughout life. I'm still reading books. I've got lots of books piled up by my bed, so has Annalisa on her side of the bed. And our children, we are developing books and series of books for them to read well into their sort of adulthood. And so we're setting them up now to start off on that process of doing that now. So again, re-emphasizing that we're not creating a school. So we're not like other hybrid groups where it's basically a school for 2 days. We are not a school. We are assisting the child as a mentor for them to be able to undertake independent learning and to receive learning through various group activities that will then continue and set them up better for independent learning throughout life, so that when they go to university, they're not one of those group of people that drop out because they haven't got used to independent learning, and they'll be able to carry on with the rest of life, carrying on with that. Is there anything else in here to mention? I guess the virtue lesson again is a weekly lesson on academic lesson on the virtues, but that will also include doing other activities, as I mentioned before. A variety of other things they'll be doing, such as like apologetics, being able to defend and explain the Catholic faith. Also about looking at the nature of the what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? How should I go about finding a spouse? How about my vocation? Out in the world teaches people that you can be free. You can go out and do whatever you like. And that's not what we emphasize, because the problem of saying you can go off and do whatever you want, that was sort of the education that I had. But then as an early adult, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Nobody helped me to choose a job, to know what I was going to do. I ended up going through a variety of careers and things. And I mean, not that there was anything bad in what I did essentially, but I had to sort of gradually find out what my vocation was over quite some time because I never had a personal mentor. So the personal mentor here in the secondary education is also there to assist them to learn about what their vocation is, what their purpose in life, what their skills are, and to help them to discern and to talk to their parents about that, and to try to get the parents to be discerning and helping the child in their path in life. Because we don't believe in this idea of oh, you can be free to go off and do whatever you want, off you go, see you later, goodbye, you go and have fun in your life. We are here in a sort of an apprenticeship and a partnership with the children to help them and to walk along a path with them, to journey along them in their faith to reach heaven, because God does have a path for them, and we're going to try and help them to discover what that path is. And so that will sort of take place through the virtue lesson in a variety of different ways. I've given you a couple of examples of that. Let me see. I guess that's pretty much it. In fact, we've had an hour and a half now. Just one other thing I would add about the reading. So the children also will go through a program of much more in-depth history of the world by reading a series of 3 books, Light to the Nations, and All Ye Lands. All Ye Lands is sort of the easier version first. It will take them through. So they're effectively re-going over what they did with the Tan story of civilization first, but this time in a more depth, mature level at secondary level, and they'll be learning a lot more about not only Western history, but they're looking at cultures and the growth of kingdoms in Africa, Japan, China, South America. They're going to learn far more about history than we ever did when we were at school. And of course, in the same format of this chronological story of God's story or His story, history, seeing the thread of God through history and being able to put all these events of history together to make sense of them, rather than the disparate random sort of sections that occur if you go to school. And of course, if you go to school, there's like 1,000 years missing, because we're sort of being brought up in a Protestant Anglo-Saxon culture where basically nothing, there's a missing 1,000 years in history from the 400s all the way to the Reformation, going through and explaining how what happened, what's happening in those times, and making doing good history. Okay, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we just close off, Anna? Okay, so just to mention quickly about music. So the Catholic Catechism of the Catholic Church says that music is the highest form of art. So we want to be helping our children to grow in that, because the church needs good ministers in music. So we make it a requirement that children learn a musical instrument. Making it a requirement, they end up, in the same way that maybe children might not necessarily enjoy maths or English all the time. If we decided to make maths or English only optional, then of course children would drop it very quickly potentially. And so equally with music, that there's a requirement that your children will be learning a musical instrument, and we will have a tutor here who will be able to tutor the child in the musical instrument each week that they are taking. And we would encourage people to take musical instruments that can be used in worship, or can be used in basically in church worship. But also, instruments that might be able to use in a group where the families can learn to do and live music together. So our children, for example, have learnt the piano, they've learnt drums and guitar. We can play, all sorts of sort of contemporary songs. So we like to sing, do songs from the 80s, from the 90s, but also, have Christian contemporary worship music together. And also, when it comes to traditional liturgy, our daughter Elizabeth will be playing the piano when we have Mass. In the ordinariate rite, and also when we have the divine office, she plays the hymns for that. So to really help the children to grow in music in that way. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, well, thanks very much for listening. And very good. The next one. How much? Okay, so we're looking to go into Rotherfield Village Hall or somewhere nearby. And the reason why we actually moved into this area a year and a half ago with that intention in mind. So we moved into this area. This area is beautiful countryside. We believe that children should be brought up in an environment away from the world where they can learn about God in nature, and they can have a sense of peace and quiet in order for them to reflect on who God is, not if they're living in some town centre somewhere. And this particular area is very well known for being beauty with the Sussex Weald that we live on. Lots of groups have set up here because of that over time. So, for example, there was a Catholic seminary here that closed down, I think, in the 1980s, just about a mile down the road from us. Again, seminaries are normally chosen a place sort of away from the world for them to grow in their faith, and we want the same for our children. So we're looking sort of to create a Catholic community here in East Sussex, where children can thrive in this area. There's also a variety of different house prices in the area. So there's Crowborough nearby, which is, I guess, and there's also, from Tunbridge Wells, which from our house is about 10, 15 minutes to the train station, which is only about 39 minutes straight into London Bridge. So those that, who have, parents working in London can get there quite quickly, even though we're quite out in the countryside here in the rolling hills. Other people have set up here over the years. So, for example, in Mayfield, about 5 minutes from here, the Archbishop of Canterbury had his summer residence here some time ago. It then got converted into a Catholic independent school, Mayfield Girls' School. You may have heard of it. Then, even smuggler groups would set up in this area in the quiet where they won't get seen to do their sort of dealing and ideas, and then go back down to the south coast, Eastbourne, where they'd undertake their smuggling activities. So, this local area historically has always been known as a place to sort of get away from it. There are artists here, musicians that live here that come out for that lifestyle, and we want to, set up a Catholic community in that sort of geographical environment, hence Rotherfield. So in terms of price-wise, we're looking at probably about £650 per month per family, which is 12 times that for a year. So that's what we'd be looking for. Now, I know that some people may feel, oh, I can't afford it. Can you reduce the amount? It is a difficult thing. We understand that not everybody can afford this. But we want to provide a quality. It's better to provide a quality education for some children than a poor quality education for or no decent education for anybody. Teacher, I know that some places have gone to be a bit cheaper, and they're making more use of volunteers, for example. But volunteer teachers don't typically stay. They may well be very enthusiastic to begin with, but after a while they begin to want to get paid, and we want to pay. With the teaching that we've been doing with our children and the tutors that we are aware of, we found a good, bunch of high quality teachers. If you want high quality, good teachers who are good at their subject, they'll simply want to get paid. We're expecting about 70% of our costs literally to be on sort of GCSE courses and tutors and so on. That is a really bottom line cheap price to pay. Children, even in a maintained school controlled by the government, schools receive about between £6,000 and £7,000 per student. So we don't want to provide an impoverished education where our children don't have a good quality education just because we wanted to make it cheaper. Private schools, £20,000 per student per year. So we're talking, different money, and this is £650 per family that we'll be looking for. So this is really the rock bottom price that we would probably be paying, or would be that, and we wouldn't we would try to to make it fit that amount and not to raise the fee beyond that, to be honest with you.